Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Cabinet meeting, Shropshire Council's Cabinet meeting of the 23rd of March. I'm obliged to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and can I also remind members to please identify your name and role before speaking, so it is clear to those watching the meeting as to who is actually talking. So thank you. I'm going to say a few words before we start the Cabinet meeting regarding the Mancuri Day pause for reflection. 2 years ago, life as we knew it changed. The Prime Minister announced that the country would be put into lockdown due to the rapidly spreading coronavirus disease. From that day, we all changed the way we lived our lives. We stayed at home, many of us working remotely and avoiding unnecessary contact with others, and we took care to socially distance and other measures to help us reduce the spread of COVID. I don't think any of us imagined that some 2 years later, we will still be in a situation where we are learning to live with COVID, and we shouldn't forget that infections are on the rise once again in Shropshire. But in those 2 years, many of us have lost loved ones, family, friends, colleagues, neighbours, parents, grandparents, sadly even children. That's why today I'm asking you to support Mancuri's National Day of Reflection, a time for us all to connect with each other as we support those who are grieving and reflect on the lives of those lost during the last 2 years. Whilst life is beginning to return to normal for many, there are many more of us still living with the trauma of loss. So let's ensure the legacy of these pandemic years is of compassion, love and active support for those around us. We also thank those who have given so much over the last 2 years, doctors, nurses, medical staff who have worked in unimaginable conditions, the key workers who have kept the country running, care workers who've worked in care homes and gone into people's homes to support them, those who have kept public transport running, bins emptied, supermarkets open and stocked, and so many others who have kept the services going that we all rely on up and running. Whilst today is a National Day of Reflection relating to coronavirus, I also ask that as we pause to reflect, we think of those in Ukraine and those who have fled across borders in fear of the atrocities that are being brought upon their beloved country by a tyrant whose inhumane actions shame him and his nation. We think about those who have lost their lives to protect their freedom, and we think of those who are left behind, and we all hope and pray that this conflict comes to an end as soon as possible. Please let us take a moment to reflect. Thank you, members, very grateful. So, moving on to our agenda for today. Item number 1, apologies for absence. We are all here, so we don't have any apologies. Disclosable interests, anybody? No, thank you. Item number 3, minutes of the last meeting. To confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of February, I'm happy to propose those minutes. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Potter. All those in favour? Thank you very much. Moving on to public question time. We have one question received from Mr. Mike Streetley, and he's asked that his question is read out on his behalf. And Tim Collard is going to do the honours for us. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Leader. So this is a question for Councillor Carroll. The question is this. In his response to a question from Councillor Rob Wilson about the proposed Shrewsbury North West Road to the Shropshire Council Cabinet meeting on the 16th of February 2022, Councillor Dean Carroll said that, Planning determination has now been pushed back to summer 2022, with the full business case being submitted to Council by December 2022. But that the delay in submission of the full business case does not, at this time, however, mean that the North West Relief Road programme overall is critically impacted around the forecast construction and road opening dates. First, could the Council please confirm whether it is still allowing for the risk that the planning application might be subject to a public inquiry, and what effect a public inquiry would have on the programme outlined by Councillor Carroll? Second, noting the Council's report to the Scrutiny Place Overview Committee on the 5th of November 2020, which indicated the following dates in the North West Road programme. First, the planning application will be determined by autumn 2021, slippage of 9 months. Second, a public inquiry from autumn 2021 to spring 2022. Third, DFT endorsement of the full business case, presumably several months after it was signed off by full council, in winter 2021, slippage of at least 1 year. Next, construction starts spring 2022, and finally road opening in winter 2023. Can Councillor Carroll please be specific about what the programme construction start and road opening dates are now expected to be?
Thank you, Tim. To answer the question, Councillor Dean Carroll.
Thank you, Leader. And I'd like to thank Mr. Streetley for his question, although before I start the response, I think I will point out that, as I did last Cabinet meeting with Councillor Wilson, that the correct name for this project is the North West Relief Road. So in answer to the first question Mr. Streetley raised, the Council has consistently, within its project programming, allowed for the potential for an application for public inquiry or judicial review. This has been communicated and agreed with the Department for Transport as part of our ongoing engagements over programme funding and delivery, and can be accommodated if needed within the requirements of the large local majors funding window. In answer to the second of Mr. Streetley's questions, the Council will consider and confirm the North West Relief Road construction start and completion dates as part of its full business case approval. As has been previously reported, this remains due in winter 2022.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Moving on to member question time, we did receive an urgent question from Councillor David Basma. David?
Thank you. My urgent question is this. The soaring price of fuel is reaching crisis point, with many facing difficult decisions between whether they spend on food or heating. In rural areas, this stress is even worse since the price of heating oil and LPG, liquid petroleum gas, are not covered by Ofgem's price cap. So price rises have been more than tripled than that before the impact of the war in Ukraine. What can Shropshire Council do to help families and the elderly who will be forced to cut spending on heating and food to a point where it will affect their health?
Thank you, David, and I'll answer that as the question only came in very late yesterday. Despite it only being asked yesterday, I completely acknowledge the urgency of the situation, and we have therefore put together the best answer we can in the short time available. We're acutely aware of the pressures that many people in the county face from rising prices, whether this be for fuel, food or heating. As a county where wages are lower than the average and a sparsely populated rural county, the effects exacerbated by further price rises due to the conflict in Ukraine will no doubt be felt very hard by many people in Shropshire. And as a council, we recognise the difficulties that this places on people in the county. Indeed, many of our services are the first place that people turn to. There are a number of different ways that the council can offer help, such as through housing benefit or our council tax support scheme, but there are also many other ways that the council can help those most in need, and there are also a broad range of community groups and organisations that can also provide support, help and advice. To this end, we're in the process of pulling together a comprehensive listing of support from the council and our partners that is available, and we'll be publicising this as soon as we can to both the community and to the many organisations who may help to refer people in need. We're also re-establishing the Shropshire COVID Recovery Social Impact Task Force
brackets cost of living now, and its first meeting is actually tomorrow. This will help bring together a range of stakeholders to share their knowledge of the impact on people in Shropshire and the support available to them. It will also begin to look at the gaps and further actions focusing on inequalities and targeted support. Obviously, as soon as we've got that, we'll get it out to all members as well, so that that can be put out. I think it's fair to say that the council does have a lot of services that can help people. I don't think they were easily seeable on the website or via members, so that's why we decided to bring that stuff together, incidentally, before your questions. Thank you. Do you have a supplementary, David? Or?
Well, just thank you for that response, and say I think it's very useful to have that information brought together, because I think that's what people need, is quick advice in very difficult circumstances.
Yeah, thanks, David. Totally agree. Totally agree.
Okay, so our first normal members' question is from Councillor Julian Dean, who's in the room.
Thank you. On International Women's Day, a local journalist highlighted the government figures for the gender pay gap at Shropshire Council in comparison with nearby authorities. These show that the gap is considerably wider here than in our neighbours and well above the average for local government, with a mean difference in hourly rate between women and men of 16.4% compared to 5.2% in Telford and Wrekin and 6.5% in Herefordshire, and with a national mean difference of around 5.5%. What explanation is there for this? What strategies are in place to address this? Will the Cabinet commit to targets for a significant reduction in the gender pay gap to levels comparable with our neighbouring authorities and national averages? Recognising that even the national average is still too much, will the Cabinet commit to developing continuing strategies to eliminate the gender pay gap?
Thank you, Councillor Dean, and the answer will be provided by Councillor Gwynne Butler.
Thank you, Leader. It's Councillor Gwynne Butler, Portfolio Holder for Finance and Corporate Resources. Thank you for the question. Shropshire Council is an organisation made up of extremely diverse roles. Almost a quarter of our entire workforce, however, are within Shire services in cleaning and catering positions, and 87% of our staff in Shire services are women. This alone has a profound impact on the overall gender pay gap figure for Shropshire Council. In addition, the gender pay gap widens across the country for those over the age of 40 due to unequal sharing of caring responsibilities, which contributes to a high proportion of women in part-time roles. Over 70% of Shropshire Council's workforce is over the age of 40, and almost 56% of our workforce are women over the age of 40. Shropshire Council is committed to equality across all strands, not just gender equality. Our flexible working policy supports all employees to be able to request flexible working, supporting our employees' work-life balance. In addition, more gender-specific initiatives include the support offered to our employees around the menopause, with training for managers, raising awareness of the menopause across the organisation, and peer groups to support our employees. Shropshire Council is committed to equal pay for all, and whilst other gender pay gaps figure is higher, and whilst our gender pay gap figure is higher than some other authorities, this does not represent a position of Shropshire Council paying men more than women for working in the same position, but instead is merely a reflection of the diversity of roles and the role types across the organisation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor Dean, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, please. Thank you for that, and there's some useful information there, and I appreciate that this reflects a historic undervaluing of caring work predominantly done by women and the age profile of the workforce. I'm still a little bit concerned that we are so different to Herefordshire, which I imagine has similar profiles, so I would like to hear more about that. But the other part of my question is that what this doesn't tell us about is the if you like, the gendered role gap through the organisation. So to give an example from outside, apocryphally, primary education is a sector where there are very few male teachers, but there's a higher preponderance of male head teachers. So what we're not seeing here is whether the gendered roles, if you like, in the junior positions are being reflected through the rest of the organisation. In other words, do we have enough women managers, to put it crudely? So I think we need information on that as well to reach a full picture on whether we're addressing this effectively.
Thank you, Councillor Dean.
I think it's just worth pointing out that certainly when it comes to our nearest neighbours, we have this issue of it's difficult to compare apples and pears. They don't have a Shire services, we do, and that has a huge impact on our gender pay gap. I think it would be wrong of me to point out that actually in terms of our gender gap across professions in the council, we have a high preponderance of women. And that goes right down the scale, but certainly we can get some more information from the HR team to you for that. But you know, I'm delighted that we have the number of senior managers that are female that we do. The more the better. Thank you. So the next question is actually from 3 councillors. It's from Gerald Dakin, Peggy Mullock and Tom Biggins, but I think Councillor Tom Biggins is going to ask the question and he's joining us online. Tom.
Yes, thank you, Leader. As Whitchurch members, we have really appreciated the commitment by the portfolio holder and indeed the whole of Cabinet to providing a new leisure facility for Whitchurch despite these difficult financial times. We have also appreciated being involved in the overall process and are very much looking forward to the next stage. Can the portfolio holder confirm the date of the Cabinet meeting when the report on a new Whitchurch swimming pool comes up for decision? And if that decision is positive and everyone in Whitchurch are keeping their fingers crossed that it will be, when can the public have their say and what would be the likely timescale for the pool's completion?
Thank you very much, Councillor Biggins. Answering the question, Councillor Cecilia Motley.
Thank you very much indeed, Leader. I am Councillor Cecilia Motley, portfolio, I have to write it down, portfolio holder for communities, place, culture, leisure, tourism and transport. I would very much like to thank Councillors Dakin, Mullock and Biggins for their question. And the answer is that they're quite right. The future provision of Whitchurch swimming pool and fitness centre is a priority for Shropshire Council. It was unfortunate that the old facility had to close, but the decision was taken in the light of the findings of an independent structural engineer who advised the council that repairs were not a viable option. A new swimming and fitness centre will require significant capital investment from the council, and therefore a feasibility study was commissioned to a firm of design specialists, chartered architects, to provide us with the evidence and insight on which to base our decision on the provision of a new facility. We've moved the feasibility study at pace to aid our decision making on this. Current covered capital investment requirement is estimated to be between 11.5 million to 12.1 million, dependent on the inclusion of a movable floor to half the pool, which would add greater flexibility to the use of the facility. The costs take account of the high levels of construction inflation costs currently being experienced. We are currently undertaking an initial key stakeholder engagement exercise to input into the feasibility stage. And Cabinet will be considering the feasibility study at a meeting at the end of April. I think it's the 27th of April, Leader, isn't it? To agree the next steps for the provision of a new facility, and subject to Cabinet agreement, a formal public consultation exercise will follow. Our current high-level programme, subject to Cabinet and Council agreement, and the planning application process, could see us on site in the autumn of 2023, and a new facility we hope could be open in the summer of 2025. I do understand Whitchurch residents' frustration at the pool being closed in the first place, but we do need to ensure that the new facility proposals are sustainable, both in terms of the financial position and our climate change agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Motley. Councillor Tom Biggins, do you have a supplementary?
No, Leader, but I'd just like to thank Councillor Motley for her response.
Brilliant, thank you. We'll get you that call as soon as we possibly can, I promise. Okay, so moving on to the next question from Councillor Rosemary Dartnell, who I think is in the room.
She is.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Rosemary.
Thank you. Shropshire residents urgently need improved public transport. The current offer, meaning the offer last week, is well known to be unacceptable, and as we face our responsibilities to mitigate for the climate emergency, an integrated transport system is a keystone policy. This question arises because of concern for the success or otherwise of Shropshire Council's government funding bid for £98 million for the bus service improvement plan under an enhanced bus partnership scheme. Following bid submission in October 2021, the report for Cabinet expects a response in 2022 to the bid by February, by March, and perhaps even early April. We are fast approaching the end of March with no word, causing growing concern for public transport provision in Shropshire. When will a response be given, and what is the plan B for essential and improved bus services in Shropshire should the funding bid be unsuccessful or only partially delivered? As we come into a new financial year, what will the impact on existing bus partnership service levels if BSIP funding is not forthcoming? And how will this impact on the budget for 22-23, the Council's budget for 22-23? How will the public be consulted in the event of a reduction in bus service provision as a result of the failed government bid? And how will the Council authorise such a change in service?
Thank you, Councillor Dartnell. Councillor Cecilia Motley.
Thank you, Leader. Once again, I'm Councillor Cecilia Motley, portfolio holder for Communities, Place, Culture, Leisure, Tourism and Transport. Thank you very much for your question, Councillor Dartnell. And the Council is still awaiting news on the outcome of the bus service improvement plan funding submission. Announcements on BSIPs across the country have all been delayed, and the latest news from the Department of Transport is that we may hear the outcome by the end of April, but we were told that, as you rightly pointed out, in January and March. Officers are working with bus operators to understand what the impact on the network ambitions will be should a funding award be either limited or not forthcoming. The current enhanced bus partnership is not dependent on BSIP funding, with the option to vary this plan once any funding award is made. We need to wait for the outcome of the BSIP, but should any award not reflect the ambitions of our BSIP, then a public consultation will be included as part of any next steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Motley. Councillor Dartnell, do you have some? Please ask your supplementary.
Thank you. Is that it?
For the moment.
No mention of the dramatic failure in Arriva bus provision in Shropshire that has been announced since this question was submitted. Abject failure on the part of this administration to secure viable public transport for the residents of Shropshire to get to and from work, to get to and from appointments. Public transport was recognised as inadequate, and the Bus Back Better scheme addresses addresses that. But now we are unable even to maintain a woefully inadequate system. We are without budget provision for improved public transport and active travel. Every council action supports the survival of car dependency in Shropshire at the same time as declaring a climate emergency. To make the shift from car dependency requires a modal shift involving integrated public transport and active travel. We must put our money into that change. This is a council that wades ahead with vaguely costed construction projects and appears to forget the main objective of council, which is public service for communities. In September 2021, at a Bus Back Better briefing,
Councillor Dartnell, is this a supplementary question or another statement?
Yes, it's a question. I asked what was our plan B. There was no answer here from the portfolio holder, but it is clear from events in the interim that the truth is there is no plan B. There was none in September and there's none now. And what if government delays a funding decision until August? I ask that with urgency a plan B is brought forward that involves a review of routes. For example, those living in Port Hill Ward, a mile or so from the hospital, travel into town and back out again to get there. Can we make this dreadful debacle into a positive for Shropshire residents, please? And also, does this council's bid for Bus Back Better have the active and enthusiastic support of our local MPs? What are they doing to make the case for Shropshire?
Thank you, Councillor Dartnell, for an extremely long question. Councillor Cecilia Motley.
Yeah, well, I should have to just pick away at this, I think, Leader, because it's slightly difficult to make out what was a question and what was a statement here. So basically, with regard to Arriva, Arriva is a commercial service. It's not actually, it is Arriva that makes decisions if it wants to withdraw any of its services, and we have to negotiate with them about this. So I think there needs to be an understanding that we don't own Arriva. Obviously, it's a national company. With regards to the bus strategy in general, we have done absolutely everything that we were required to do by government. We got the bus service programme on time at the end of October. We've been in constant touch with the Department of Transport. We are very keen to get an integrated public transport scheme going, but it's extremely difficult to do it when we have absolutely no idea as yet, as other authorities, as I said before, are in the same position, of what we are able to do through BSIP, if anything. However, I do have to tell you that we have an extremely experienced and capable transport team who are already working on alternatives should BSIP not come forward, and those will be made available as and when we know what's going to happen with BSIP. So to try and imply that we're just sitting there waiting for money to fall into our hands from government on this, I'm afraid is absolutely wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mutley. It should also be pointed out, Councillor Dartnell, that when Arriva actually told us they were stopping some of those services, the council had actually decided to contribute financially to keep those services going until we actually get the result of BSIP. So we've certainly not been sitting doing absolutely nothing. And I can also tell you that certainly at least 2 of our MPs, I can't speak for the third because I've not asked him the direct question, but certainly 2 of our MPs have been involved in this right from the start.
Leader, could I just say that the actual the BSIP bid was very strongly supported by all our MPs, all of whom made statements to that effect when the bid was put forward.
Thank you, Councillor Motley. The next question is from Councillor Tony Parsons, who's also joining us online. Councillor Tony Parsons, over to you.
Thank you, Leslie. We support the key elements in Agenda Item 8, update to private rented sector housing enforcement policy, particularly the proposal of introducing stiffer penalties for rogue landlords, which is very welcome given that this affects approximately 17% of housing stock and often those with the lowest incomes. Given that fines can be as much as £30,000 and can only be spent according to paragraph 5.1 either to further the delivery of the council's statutory functions relating to the enforcement activities covering the private rented sector or paid into central government, could the Cabinet member confirm that the authority plans to increase staffing resource within the private housing enforcement team to increase our capacity? After 12 years of austerity cuts, our workforce has been cut to the bone, and this additional function must be supported with additional staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. To answer the question, Councillor Simon Jones.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Simon Jones, I'm the portfolio holder for adult social care and public health. And thank you, Councillor Parsons, for your question. The Council welcomes the support expressed for the key elements, including the proposed introduction of stiffer financial penalties for rogue landlords, which are included in the updated private rented sector housing enforcement policy. It is correct that the proceeds from any financial penalties referred to in the policy may only be retained by the Council if they are spent on housing enforcement activities covering the private rented sector, and if there is any unused surplus, then this must be paid to central government. Whilst it is much welcomed that is set out in law to permit councils to retain the proceeds of financial penalties, it is unrealistic in Shropshire to expect this to substantially fund additional staffing resources that would increase the council's capacity to undertake housing enforcement work on a permanent basis. There are significant reputational and financial risks associated with funding statutory services from financial penalties, where the council's enforcement ethos driven by income targets derived from achieving a certain level of enforcement related financial penalties. Landlords and property management businesses might regard the council as using enforcement as a cash cow, with the behaviour of those whose roles depend on this income driven by the need to achieve a financial target. Fundamentally, financial penalties are not an income generating tool. They are an enforcement tool that must be used as a reasonable and proportionate manner, in line with the principles of the good regulations set out in the Council's Better Regulation and Enforcement Policy, for the purpose of securing compliance and long-standing behaviour changes across the private rented sector. Furthermore, it does not necessarily follow that because a financial penalty has been imposed that it will actually be paid. Any non-payment becomes a civil debt and must be pursued through the Council's debt recovery process, which in itself incurs additional costs, both in terms of officer time and financial payments, and ultimately may have to be written off as bad debt. It's very much the desire of the Council to engage with landlords and property management businesses to encourage them to spend money on achieving compliance, i.e. to improve the safety standards and energy efficiency of accommodation, rather than pursuing them for a financial penalty debt. There will be no hesitancy in using financial penalty powers where this is required, but this will generally be as a last resort. For this reason, they will be used infrequently and will not lead to a significant or permanent increase in available funds. In practice, any financial penalty that is issued will support the Council's financial position on any ad hoc basis, rather than creating a basis on which to increase capacity to fund the delivery of private rented sector housing enforcement. Nevertheless, in October 2021, a restructure moved the housing enforcement function from public health to homes and communities in the Place Directorate, with a new assistant director and new head of service. As part of this restructure, it was recognised that the staffing resource available to properly deliver the housing enforcement function were inadequate, and for this reason it was agreed as part of the restructure consultation that the staffing resource would be increased from 2.3 full-time equivalents to 3.3 full-time equivalents. This, however, reduced the staffing availability to undertake environmental protection functions and has therefore increased the risk in this other area. The increased resource in housing enforcement has been welcomed, but it's still insufficient to proactively address all the risks that are associated with the housing enforcement function. As a result, managers are continuing to explore options to move budgets to further increase the staffing resource for this function, as the only way in which the Council can fund this work. If successful, this will permanently and substantially provide additional staffing resources to enable greater proactive housing enforcement work to be undertaken. However, it will unfortunately be balanced by increased pressures and risks in other areas of statutory responsibility.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Parsons, do you have supplementary?
Yes, I'd like to thank the portfolio holder for that very thorough answer to this particular question, and also for the fact that there is ongoing work to look to increase the staffing resource within the enforcement team, albeit that may be to the detriment of other departments. All I would like to make sure is that if there is any surplus from this proposal going forward, that it is spent locally rather than returned to central government. Thank you very much.
I'm sure we'd all like it to be spent locally rather than returning it to central government, Councillor Parsons. Councillor Jones will take that on board. Thank you very much. And then the next question is from Councillor Caroline Bagnall, who is in the room. Caroline.
Thank you. It's interesting to note that the recent library consultation found that overall levels of satisfaction with the current library services are high. Over 900 people responded to the draft library strategy consultation, and I quote, "Customers view library staff as the most important aspect of the service. Opening times and the range, quality of stock are also very important." So can the Cabinet member please explain, number one, why single staffing is being explored, thus ignoring the views of the public and the high value they place on the staff? Number two, why it is planned to install more self-service machines in libraries, thus inevitably reducing the opportunities for the public to interact with and benefit from the knowledge of staff? Number three, noting the risk to staff in your report, could the Cabinet member confirm on what date was written notification of the proposals sent to the trade unions to engage with them on staffing impact? Number four, Can the Cabinet member provide an assurance that there will be no staff redundancies from this proposal? And number 5, can the Cabinet member provide assurance that there will be no reduction in library opening hours or local provision for residents? The consultation also found that in terms of the future, many people are keen for libraries to stay as they are. People argue strongly for the importance of libraries to individuals and communities. And that's a direct quote. So can the Cabinet member also please explain why it's proposed to reduce subsidies to community-run libraries and to reset expectations about support? Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. The answer will be provided by Councillor Senior Motley.
Thank you very much, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Bagnall, for your question. I don't have to read out my portfolio.
No.
Again, I don't think I've already bored everybody with it. In answer to your questions, it's correct to say that the recent library consultation found that overall levels of satisfaction with library services are high, and we want to maintain this satisfaction within the changed circumstances brought about by the pandemic and the public sector financial pressures that not only ourselves but most other local authorities are under. However, it's worth pointing out that whilst 900 people responded to the library survey, the vast majority of these were current users and over 60 years old. And the response from those not using services currently and the 30 and under age group was very low. One of our aims is to make libraries and facilities therein more attractive and available to new users, including and particularly younger age groups, as well as the core group of library users. With regard to single staffing, this has been embraced by Shropshire libraries for many years at our smaller sites, as part of the network of sites we maintain. The purpose of this strategy is not to reduce the frontline services and staff, but rather to streamline delivery and encourage much greater use of the service. Many authorities have introduced self-service machines, and it is not intended that this will lead to redundancies amongst frontline staff. If anything, their roles will be enhanced by the introduction of the self-service machines, because it will free them up to develop services further and give our team greater freedom to engage with communities, allowing them to benefit from our knowledgeable, friendly, informative staff. And I think it's worth also adding there that our staff are quite excited by this development. These proposed changes also give us the opportunity to consider changing opening hours. This could include increasing hours, alongside expanding the range of services delivered by libraries and by other services within the library setting. Any changes to opening hours will be subject to consultation. The Shropshire Libraries team is preparing several consultations as part of the delivery of the draft library strategy, subject to approval by Cabinet on the 23rd of, hang on.
That's today.
Sorry, subject to approval by Cabinet today. Because actually nothing can happen until this strategy is agreed. It's planned to deliver public and staff consultations, including union representation, to ensure inclusivity of our staff as we develop proposals for the transformation of the service. Changes at individual branches will be part of the delivery of the strategy and will be subject to community engagement locally. These are challenging times, and Shropshire Council's medium-term financial strategy has set out savings across the council, including within the library service. Any savings depend upon the approval of the draft library strategy 22-27, as said before, followed by the development of specific proposals for local library services. Impacts on individual library provision arising from this would be subject to further public consultation, collaborative community discussions and political scrutiny. Community-run libraries will be considered as part of this. We see this strategy as a positive step forward towards ensuring that the Shropshire Library Service is fit for the 21st century. The pandemic has highlighted a change in how the public wishes to engage with councils digitally and physically, and the library service is an integral part of this change. And with this in mind, the service is transforming itself to respond. The draft library strategy 2022-2027 cannot be predetermined, and we feel that consultation and community collaboration is key to delivering the best library service for Shropshire. Frontline services for residents and local provision that is responsive to community need is the priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Motley. Do you have a supplementary?
I do, yes. So while making libraries more attractive and available to new users should be encouraged and applauded, it is really important that the views of the older respondents to the survey, the consultation, are taken notice of. Page 9 of the strategy says that the proportion of over 65s living in the county is well above the national average, and that trend is set to
Sorry,
continue.
Caroline, can I say again, is there a question?
There is.
We are obviously going to be discussing the library strategy in a while.
Yeah,
so.
I do appreciate that. Thank you. So I just feel it's very important that those people's views are taken into account and are given the value that they're due. Can you state that the intention is not to reduce the frontline services and staff? Or you say that it's not. So can you give an assurance that the staff will remain on the front line and not be hived off into other areas dealing with online services and that kind of thing? Will they still be face to face with the public in the libraries?
Well, the purpose of frontline staff is that they actually are on the front line, if I may say so. But many of them are keen to expand their roles, and if they wish to do so, then we would not wish to stop them from doing that. With regards to your issue about older responders and the fact that you're quite right, we do have a very high rate of over 65s. They will continue to be catered for, but we are very keen to try and introduce new services delivered differently so that we can attract more people into our libraries. We're very conscious of the fact that libraries are they're at the centre of our market towns. Nearly all of our libraries are, and we really want them to be used in as many ways as possible, so that people can take advantage of services provided by Shropshire Council as well as the standard library services. So this is actually a positive step forward. It is not a negative step forward. It is not an attempt to try and reduce staff by the back door, and I do think I need to make that absolutely clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hartley. And then moving on to our last question, Councillor David Vasmer.
Thank you. What preparations are Shropshire Council making to welcome Ukrainian refugees? And what communications has Shropshire received from central government about Ukrainian refugees? How do preparations for Ukrainian refugees differ from those made for refugees from Afghanistan?
Thank you, Councillor Vasmer, and answering the question, Councillor Simon Jones.
Thank you. Councillor Simon Jones, portfolio holder for adult social care and public health. If I thank Councillor Vasmer for his question. My response is the UK government announced the Homes for Ukraine scheme on the 14th of the 3rd, 2022. The scheme encourages people who are happy to offer a room in their home to a Ukrainian family for 6 or more months to register their details. To date, there has been over 100,000 registrations on the site. The scheme aims to match families and hosts together and offers a £350 per calendar month payment to hosts as a goodwill gesture. Phase 1 is focused on households who are aware of named Ukrainian families. We have no details of Phase 2 yet. Government has stated that there is no impact on benefit income or council tax single supplement for anyone receiving this payment or agreeing to resettle families. The £350 per calendar month paid to the host is not expected to pay for any costs associated with the Ukrainian families, as they will have the access to benefits, employment for items such as food, clothing, etc. On the 18th of March, the government released Homes for Ukraine guidance for councils. The local authority will have the following responsibilities: in-person visits to check suitability of accommodation being offered before or shortly after the family move in. Check suitability of households offering accommodation to ensure no serious safeguarding or welfare concerns. Undertake basic DVS checks on all adults in the sponsor household. Where incoming arrivals are children and or vulnerable adults, an enhanced DVS check with barred list checking will be required for all adults in the sponsor household. provide wraparound services for the households resettled in the UK, provide an interim payment of £200 per guest for subsistence costs, which does not need to be repaid, provide school places for children of school age for which additional funding will be provided. Statutory homelessness assistance will apply in cases where the sponsor-guest relationship breaks down and the guest is homeless or at risk of homelessness, and administer the £350 per month thank you payment to sponsors following the completion of all property checks. The government have announced that they will fund local authorities £10,500 per individual settled in their area for 12 months. The government will then review funding for future years in due course. We are in contact with Shropshire Supports Refugees, SSR, who are regularly in conversation with local Ukrainian and Polish support groups. SSR are keen to be involved but need to understand that funding available, which I have advised, I will update on as soon as I can. For information, the 2021 census data relating to country of birth for those living in Shropshire for Ukraine and neighbouring authorities, I won't bother reading that list, that'll be on the printed answer. The difference in settling Ukrainian families to those we have settled from Syria and Afghanistan is primarily the predicted number of households and people who are expected, as well as the fact that they will primarily be going into family homes rather than independent homes. However, further to this, it is important to note that the majority of families will be mums with children and elderly, as the men have been retained in Ukraine to fight. So the key actions, we have regular press releases to ensure up-to-date information, setting up of a dedicated Shropshire Council website page, which has already been done, regular contact with West Midlands Strategic Migration Partnership, set up working groups for key people agencies, and direct all requests received to date regarding accommodation to the government scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor?
Yes, thank you, Councillor David Bansman, leader of the DEM group. Yeah, thanks very much for that very full answer with lots of detail, which I really do appreciate. So thank you for that. I was wondering, given the fantastic response from people in Shropshire to the Ukrainian crisis and the amount that's being raised in terms of donations, I wonder if there's going to be a proactive response from the council to encourage families to come forward and provide accommodation for Ukrainian refugees. Secondly, there was mention of the answer about contact points and website, and I was hoping that maybe more details that could be circulated, certainly to the media, and I hope that they will be, circulating that and making it well known. And thirdly, there's a list of key actions there. Have you got a timeline for those? When we expect those to be implemented? I think that'll be very useful. But nevertheless, I appreciate all the efforts going into to support Ukrainian refugees by the council.
Thank you, David. Simon, do you want to come back
Yeah,
to that?
thank you. Yeah, certainly with regards to the key actions, most of those have actually been implemented, but obviously the information coming from central government is still coming through. So, we will continue to update those key actions. And I've forgotten the other question.
The other question, Councillor Bansman, I mean, it's on the front page of our website now because we got that changed to make sure that people could be directed straight through to that. I mean, I'm certainly encouraging all via my parish councils to for people to get involved, and we are doing quite a lot of press release work. I think the difficulty that we have, and certainly the officers when we spoke on Monday afternoon, is that the information is changing on a daily basis. So it's about us keeping up with that, and the best way to do it is via that website, really. So that's what we're doing. But I applaud the officers for how quickly they've responded to this, because it's not it's not a small amount of work, as you can imagine. But everybody wants to do everything they can. Thank you. Okay, so moving on, that brings us to the end of members' questions. Moving on to item number 6, which is scrutiny items. We don't have any scrutiny reports today. Item number 7, I feel like a bit of deja vu now. Item number 7, Councillor Cecilia Motley, Shropshire Library Strategy.
Thank you, Leader, and there is a certain amount of deja vu here following the previous question. But I am very pleased to be able to present the draft Shropshire Library Strategy 2022-2027 to Cabinet, hopefully for approval, because it is aiming to outline our vision and strategic objectives for library services across the county. And I would just like to emphasise the fact that libraries really they do sit at the heart of our communities. And as such, they are a huge asset for us. And therefore, we feel very strongly that it behoves us to try and make the most and the best use of them that we possibly can. I think there is a sense that there are things that are not going on in libraries which could really benefit our local communities. And these are examined in the strategy. And I'm thinking particularly in terms of assistance to people who've been affected by long-term COVID shutdowns, suffering from mental health problems. Also, we're very conscious of the fact that libraries need to be accessible to those who want to find out more about what goes on at Shropshire Council, what services they can access from Shropshire Council, which is why we're very keen to introduce Shropshire Local into more of our libraries. So this is actually quite an ambitious report. We're asking for a lot of new developments in our libraries because we feel that we have the opportunity here really to turn our libraries into, that slightly overworked phrase, but in this case I think it's appropriate, into community hubs. We want them to be the go-to place for people also coming into the county, and this actually ties in with the thrust of our tourism strategy, because with that we're very keen to encourage people to find out all they can about Shropshire, and the best place to start is by going to a local library. So as I say, this is ambitious. We appreciate the fact that we are asking our staff perhaps to change the way they're working, but we are trying to introduce methodologies which will help them to do that in terms of particularly the self-service machines. They are not, as I said before, intended to displace staff. They are intended to enable staff to actually build up and offer more services to their local communities. And we've certainly found that there's been a willingness among staff to consider this. So I think this report, it's a long report. There are a lot of appendices to it, but I would commend it to Cabinet, and I would move the recommendations under 3.1. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Motley. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Gwynn Butler. I've got some questions in the room. Councillor Vasma, you indicated first, then Councillor Buckley.
Oh, thanks very much. Yes, there are certain aspects of this report which I really welcome. I think the intent to involve the younger age groups in libraries and change the way in which they operate, I think is very welcome. My real concern, I think, on this is the community-run libraries. And I noticed in, I think it's on the report, item 8 on the savings and opportunities. It says that reducing subsidy to community-run libraries, Shropshire State community-run libraries receive combined net subsidy annually of £178,000. Wider change in local compensation should be a catalyst to reset expectations about support and potentially reduce the subsidies. My concern is that those libraries in North Brighton, Bishop's Castle, I think Broseley, Craven Arms, Highleaf, Sheffield, Keeping Water and Ellesmere could be under threat under this, looking at the surface of this policy. And I would like some reassurance that those libraries will remain open as community-run libraries and that everything will be done to include them in this new library strategy, and they're not left out.
Thank you, Councillor Vasma. Councillor Buckley.
Yeah, thank you. I'm rather confused by this report. I think the language is very confusing to any ordinary resident who tries to make sense of it. I'm delighted to hear from Councillor Motley that we're going to have longer opening hours, more services and younger people using the libraries. because when you actually read the content of the report, we're going to be making savings through building consolidations. The opening hours will represent a saving. We're going to reduce frontline staff by a minimum of 33%. We're going to reset expectations by withdrawing subsidy from the 8 community libraries, we just heard from Councillor Basler, and we're moving to single staffing to release capacity. Our total revenue expenditure for 2019-20 is lower than the national average. So we're starting below the average, and what we're being presented with here is a series of cuts across the library service, and we're being presented by using this beautiful language as though it's an opportunity. And further confusion, that Councillor Motley thinks that staff are excited by these changes, but the risk assessment that we are presented with states clearly there is a major, what's the problem with mine? I hope that's slightly better. I imagine you don't want me to go back to the beginning. So we're being told by Councillor Motley that the staff are excited by changes, but the risk assessment we're being presented with here says that it's a major risk that staff and union consultation will resist the changes to the structure, that partnerships might not be able to deliver, and that usage may reduce. I think we have to be honest with the residents of Shropshire. When you are cutting a budget, when you are removing subsidy, when you are pulling staff, that is a cut. And it's time to have the courage of your convictions and be honest with your taxpayers as to what you are doing here. I want to understand, I want somebody to tell me the truth. When you take staff away from working with books and when you move them into Shropshire local, does that not mean that they are no longer doing library work and they are now bolstering another team to answer queries? I'm also experiencing deja vu because in my patch in Bridgnorth, our library was given, when you close down the council offices in Bridgnorth, you put 2 office workers into the library as a hub, so people could come into the library and ask questions of council staff. After 2 years, you reduce their hours. The following year, you remove them completely. So our experience out in the rules is the opposite of what you are describing. And the reason you remove them completely is because you said residents can access them online and over the telephone. So here's my suspicion. The nice staff who are working in the libraries that all your respondents said they appreciate are going to be hived off onto the telephones and onto emails to respond to all the public who are emailing into Shropshire Local. The over 60s are vulnerable people who use our libraries because they are economically excluded. They come in to feel part of the community and we have a duty to them. Let's not ignore them because it's cheaper for you to move this online. Let's cut through the language of this report and tell the truth. So far, all I see are cuts.
Thank you. I did take one exception. Not all over 60s are economically disadvantaged and vulnerable, Councillor Buckley. However, I've got a question from Councillor Hurst-Knight. Sorry, Kirsty, couldn't see you there.
Sorry. Councillor Kirsty Hurst-Knight, portfolio holder for children and education. It's more of a point on the report, really. I see our libraries are evolving, they're developing. It's great to see that they offer free activities often to our early years residents and in Bridgnorth. They've just done Lego play and there's so much stuff, good stuff going on within our libraries. If you look at table 5.3, sorry, table 2 under 5.3, item number 11, children's services, really excited about this because without attached use, we know libraries are considered safe spaces, there's work that can be done in there, and a early help offer. I'm really pleased to see that libraries can get involved and really support families where they feel safe, you know, and it's great to see that we can expand the role of the library, so I welcome this, thank you.
Wrong button. Thank you, Councillor Hurst-Knight. Councillor Gwynn Butler.
It's my right to reply as seconder, is it?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Just a couple of points I'd actually like to raise, Leader. For those community libraries that are worried about the change in the future, they perhaps need to come to Clibri Mortimer. Because in Clibri Mortimer, our social enterprise has been hosting the library now for probably the best part of 10 years. And within that remit, they host the town council. They have 3 business units they rent out. They also have a large training room and they do local training sessions locally. And I'm delighted to confirm that the council now is putting in hot desks into that centre for staff to work remotely. And this is probably the library that is furthest away from Shire Hall in the rural areas. So if anybody has concerns, do come and visit Cadbury Country. Secondly, Chair, on some of the questions, well, all the questions on the libraries and others today from the Labour Party is a wish list and a want list and stop the cuts. And it does feel that they're living in a different planet, because they can't have seen the budget when we were at full council last time. I have no problem with what they want, but please tell me how you're going to fund the revenue, not the capital, the revenue, not just for this year, but for the medium term and the long term. Don't just bring a wish list unless it's funded, and you're going to tell me what you're going to stop doing to fund it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dean Carroll.
Thank you, Leader. I've got a couple of questions for the portfolio holder. I'm hoping Councillor Motley may be able to clear up a couple of points that Councillor Buckley made. Firstly, I believe Councillor Buckley claimed that there would be a 33% reduction in frontline staff. Now, my reading of the report is that there'll be an aimed 33% reduction in transactions due to an increase in self-service machines, not necessarily a 33% reduction in frontline staff. So that's the first point of clarification. I hope Councillor Motley can reassure me on. Secondly, in terms of what makes a library, or in fact any building-based institutional organisation, successful, and that is footfall into the premises of that organisation. We all acknowledge that we need to drive footfall into libraries, and quite aside from any financial argument, footfall into libraries has been declining for not just 5 or 10 years, but for decades and decades. So I, for one, welcome the inclusion of Shropshire Local into as many libraries as possible around the county as a way of driving footfall into our local libraries, helping people who otherwise had not been inclined to access library services to actually see what wonderful services modern libraries such as Shropshire Council's libraries provide. And finally, I would like some clarification from Councillor Buckley, please, on one point in which Councillor Buckley said she wants us to tell the truth. I infer from that she believes that we haven't told the truth to date, in which case I would ask her to clarify on what exactly she believes we haven't told the truth. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to put my own hand up actually also to just make a point that I think I completely agree with Councillor Carroll about the football argument. Having been and spent quite a long time in our Ludlow library, which we have installed a Shropshire Local at, it's incredibly successful, and we have had, the best thing is we've had crossovers. So people who have not normally used the library actually have now started to use the library because they have gone to the Shropshire Local, and vice versa. People thinking that actually they had to get in touch with us or come to Shire Hall from Ludlow, they can actually do things at Shropshire Local in part of that library building. So I'm going to go back to I'm going to go to Councillor Motley first, and then I'll come back to Councillor Buckley so that she can spell out what she meant earlier on.
Thank you very much, Leader. Dave, Councillor Basma, you're concerned about community libraries. To be honest with you, the community libraries have been set up for a while now. I think Councillor Butler can probably confirm that. I think it was about 2014, 2015 when the community library system was set up. And they have always been on a sort of reducing scale of support from Shropshire Council. Nevertheless, we still support our library, our community libraries, to the tune of £178,000 a year. So we're hardly leaving them high and dry. The other point that I think is really important to make, and which nobody seems to have quite hoisted on board, is the fact that every single library is going to be involved in its own consultation process on this strategy. We want to make sure that we are tailoring our offer to the right libraries in the right places. So it's not a question of blanket decisions being taken and imposed wholesale on all our libraries in any way, shape or form. All the libraries will have considerable consultation, and public consultation will be included in this as well. So I think we've got to slightly get away from being always so negative about any suggestion that comes forward to try and improve our services here. Yes, we have to make savings in our library provision, and we know that, but you will also see that we have actually set out how we intend to go about it, and we are also in a situation where we are looking for opportunities, not only Shropshire Local, which we reckon will help save us money, but changes to opening hours are a positive, not a negative, because what we're intending to do is broaden the scope of people who can come into the libraries, because we can open when they finish work, for example. All this will be done, I repeat, on a library by library basis. So if one library says their hours are too long, and they think they should be reduced, then we can do that, and vice versa. We've also got our mobile library service, which is valued in the rural areas, and we're aware that there are ways that we can probably run that so that we can make savings there, and that is not going to be by depriving communities of a service, but by actually redirecting the service. Where I have to say that Councillor Carroll is absolutely right about the 33% as the minimum of frontline transaction processing as a result of the self-service machines. And I don't know why Councillor Buckley is so frightened of these machines. She seems to think that they're going to lead to instant redundancies. We've been through this before. The whole purpose of them is actually to reduce the workload of frontline staff so that they can actually concentrate on developing other things within the library. And there are all sorts of organisations that want to get involved with our libraries, such as Adult Social Care and Health, Job Centre Plus, Children's Services. We already have a full programme of Children's Services commissioned activity. It's been very successful, as Councillor Hurst pointed out, that we need to develop that further. And also, room rentals are being successfully organised in some libraries already. We want to see if there's capacity to do more. So can we please look at this as a positive for the population of Shropshire, instead of always just picking at it, whinging and being thoroughly negative? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Molly. I'm just going to, before I bring Councillor Buckley back in, I'm just going to make another couple of points as well. Don't forget that within this report there is also potential investment in capital and revenue that we're looking at doing. This is not all about saving money, or in your words, Councillor Buckley, cuts. I think the other thing is, and you would expect me to say this, having had that portfolio for the last 4 years, or 4 years ago, is that, you know, libraries have changed dramatically. The amount of people that are now getting their reading material online. But what our libraries have been doing really successfully is actually enticing our online readers into libraries. There's also, and unsurprisingly I suppose, been quite an increase in the number of people buying books over the pandemic. We need to turn those buyers into lenders as well, and this report takes account of that. If you talk to the staff in the libraries, standing behind a counter scanning in and out books is not really a good use of their time. The best use of their time is being out there, talking to the customers, then, you know, giving them opportunities to discuss books. It's about them helping enable rhyme times for children. And what works in one library won't necessarily work in another. Some of the events that take place, for instance, at the Lantern Library and at Ludlow Library wouldn't work in Shrewsbury Library. Some of the events that take place in Ponsonby Library are just brilliant, and they go across a whole gamut. You know, we're talking, when I was given a list very early on in my tenure as a portfolio holder of things, of events that went on in some of our libraries, the list was vast, and we want to do more of that, not less. Councillor Buckley, I'm going to let you come back.
Thank you. And I think what you can hear in the room is that the area upon which we probably all agree is that many of the current activities provided through our current library provision is really well received. I think that's the point on which there is no disagreement. We're all saying it's very much appreciated and it delivers to a group of society who are out of work, and we mustn't overlook them just because they're over 60. Coming back to some of Councillor Motley's comments, I'm really reassured actually to hear the latest answer there, that the consultation will be tailored to each library. So what I would be most reassured to hear is that the responses through that consultation will be taken on board, because the first consultation, people told you they did not want any changes, and you've presented us with a strategy which changes everything. So if we're now going to consult with each library in turn and the responses will be tailored, I would be reassured that we respect the responses that are received and not just dismiss them out of hand. In terms of my comments about honesty and the use of language, I thought I was clear. I understand the microphone's not being brilliant. We hear that there will be extended library hours. We hear that verbally, but the report states that changing the opening hours will be a saving. We are told that staffing will release capacity, and if you like to call it 33% of transactions will be taken away from processing books into Shropshire Local. Perhaps I've misunderstood, and I would really welcome the reassurance. I understand that delivering library services is one team, and answering responses on telephones and emails under Shropshire Local is another team. So what I perhaps have misunderstood, I understand that you are taking staff away from working with books and library provision, and you are transferring them into another department that will respond to queries. And if you can reassure me, then that will completely neutralise one of my concerns. My final point back to Gwilym Butler is, and he's smiling because he already knows this, yes, of course the Labour Party wouldn't cut any provision to library, and I really welcome Gwilym Butler's honesty, because he said it is a cut. He said we've got budget pressure and we are cutting funding to this service, and your report today is how you will cut the library service. And you already know, Councillor Butler, because you heard the Labour Party's alternative budget, which would cancel the unwanted North West Relief Road, and £500,000 of interest on that loan can go back into public service, and respecting the current library provision was top of our list. The Labour Party is about protecting people and communities, starting with the most vulnerable.
Thank you, Councillor Brackley. I think we've had quite enough political arguments. Thank you. Councillor Motley, do you want to come back once more before we take a vote?
Yeah, I'm sorry to say that I'm rather depressed by the fact that Councillor Buckley apparently wants to set all our libraries in aspic when we want to move them on. And I do find that very depressing. If that's Labour Party policy, well, heaven help us.
Thank you, Councillor Motley. Right, I've got a proposer, I have a seconder. All those in favour? Sending this report through to consultation. Thank you very, very much, Councillor Motley. Okay, so moving on to item number 8, which is the update to the private rented sector housing enforcement policy, which we discussed earlier as part of the member's question. Councillor Simon Jones.
Thank you, Councillor Simon Jones, portfolio holder for adult social care and public health. I'd like to present the report for the updated private rented sector housing enforcement policy. The purpose of the report is to seek Cabinet approval to consult on an updated version of the private rented sector housing enforcement policy, which was originally approved by Cabinet in July 2019. Which it will specifically address the use of additional civil financial penalties for the purpose of enforcing electrical safety standards and minimum energy efficiency requirements. The background of the report is that this is a statutory responsibility on the council to regulate private rented domestic accommodation to ensure it is safe to live in, free from health and safety hazards, and meets minimum energy efficiency levels. The civil penalty powers are an additional enforcement tool aimed at tackling criminal, rogue and irresponsible landlords, improving standards in the private rented sector, and ensuring that private rented accommodation is safe, well managed, and the property is adequately maintained. The proposed policy supplements the Council's overarching better regulations and enforcement policy. The extensions to the civil penalty powers are specifically for the purpose of improving the electrical safety standards and energy efficiency of privately rented accommodation. The council can impose civil penalties of up to £30,000 in respect of electrical safety standards and up to £5,000 for energy efficiency related matters. It is for the council to determine the level of each civil penalty up to the maximum set in law. To ensure that the penalties are used fairly and set to an appropriate level, the proposed updated policy sets out the factors that will be considered and the methods that will be used before a civil penalty is imposed. The factors are based on statutory guidance produced by the government, and I so move the paper.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Ian Nellens, thank you very much. Councillor Julian Dean, you had your hand up.
I did. Thank you very much, Councillor Julian Dean from Port Hill. And I suppose it relates back to what Councillor Parsons says at the beginning, because I think the issue here is not so much the policy, it's the capacity to enforce the policy. So during the budget setting process, the Green Group investigated to see if we could find a way to support enforcement, and we didn't manage to find a way to do that at that stage. But what we did discover was that there has been no enforcement. That this, you go back to there was an announcement in the summer. Previous cabinet member sort of had a press release about getting enforcement on energy standards in particular, encouraging landlords to abide by those energy standards. But in reality, there's been no actual enforcement of those at all. And the team, when we did our investigations, the teams recognised that there was a real issue with capacity. The other issue is with information. So I was told, for example, I'll read this out, there is work ongoing to check the validity of the open source data against local council tax data to ensure we correspond with the right people. In other words, do we actually know which properties are in bands F and G? No, we probably don't. Even though that data does exist in open source data, the EPC ratings are public data, but we haven't got the capacity to work out which properties are actually offending and to take the action. So having a policy to take action is all well and good, but we need capacity to actually put this in train. And I would ask that this is brought up at the cost of living task force, because quite clearly this is absolutely tied in with the current issues around bills increases and the need to do something drastic to help people, because those in the worst performing buildings homes will be suffering in particular. And I also further ask that this is tied in with a bit of a strategy when we're looking at our Shropshire plan and economic strategy to retrofit these homes, to really make sure that we are reaching to those private sector buildings, as well as private sector homes, as well as the public sector and social housing, to do as much as we can to insulate and to help those people reduce their bills.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. Councillor Basma.
Thank you, Councillor Basma. Underdale. I'd just like to ask a question, really, and I agree with largely what Councillor Dean was saying about the key to this, I think, is enforcement. And I'm very worried, really, that I welcome the fact that the staffing resource for enforcement is being increased from 2.3 to 3.3 full-time equivalents. But in the answer to the question earlier, from Councillor Parsons, I noticed at the end it says, how will unfortunately the increase in housing enforcement work will be unfortunately balanced by increased pressure and risk in other areas of statutory responsibility. And my concern is that throughout the authority there is problems with enforcement. I know this is an issue in planning, for example, and has been discussed at other times. And I'm concerned that yes, we're increasing the enforcement as far as housing is concerned, is concerned, but in what other areas will enforcement actually be reduced? And I'd like some more information about that. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Councillor Boswell. Councillor Jones?
Right, thank you. Actually, to both questioners, I really refer them back to my answer to Councillor Parsons. As far as the enforcement is concerned, I did answer that question on my previous response. With regards to the details of properties in the different bands, I will have to get those details, a response in writing for that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Dean, I can certainly ensure that that's added to the social task force impact group. That's not a problem. And I think it's worth stating at this point that we have increased the numbers in planning enforcement as well, as you're probably aware, Councillor Lasman. So Councillor Jones will get you a written response for the part of the question. So I have a proposer, I have a seconder. All those in favour, please. Thank you. That's carried. Moving on to item number 9, Shropshire Enhanced Bus Partnership Scheme. Councillor Cecilia Motley.
Thank you very much, Leader. Cecilia Motley, with a transport hat on, rather than communities, place, culture, leisure and tourism. This, I think, is quite straightforward. I hope everybody's got the gist of it. Basically, when the government announced the National Bus Strategy for England, they stated that from April this year, only local transport authorities with an enhanced partnership in place would be able to access the new streams of government bus funding. And of course, in this case, what we're talking about is the BSIP, the Bus Services Improvement Plan. So Shropshire Council acted quite quickly on this. We published our notice of intention to form an enhanced partnership by the deadline and publish an initial scheme by the 1st of April 2022. And so the enhanced partnerships scheme has been put together in collaboration with our bus operators that are operating a registered public bus service in Shropshire, as well as the Shropshire Community Transport Consortium, because they're a very important part of this as well. Government then launched Bus Back Better, which, as you know, has got sort of slightly stuck. And then later on, the Bus Service Improvement Plan, which we have submitted, as we've been through already this morning, and are still awaiting the response to. And we have previously anyway published a notice of intent to go forward with the enhanced partnership, because it's basically the legal framework between the council and the bus operators. So I'd be grateful if members could consider the recommendations 3.1 to approve the formation of the Shropshire Enhanced Bus Partnership Scheme as laid out in Appendix A. Note that the establishment of this initial scheme will not place any additional financial burden upon the bus operators or the council until the outcome of the Shropshire Bus Service Improvement Plan bid has been made known. And as we know, we're waiting for this. We've been waiting for it since January, and we're expecting it at the moment in April 2022. So I would move those recommendations, please, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Motley. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Potter. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you. I think all of us welcome the establishment of the partnership. It's a necessary step and it can unlock that 500,000, so I think that's really welcome. I think what we're very concerned about is what happens next, or rather what didn't happen next. So the whole idea of a partnership is that we are collectively commissioning and ensuring provision of buses across our very rural county. We're delighted that so much work by staff went into that enormous bid under Bus Back Better. But the question was asked 6 months ago, what is the plan B if all or some of that money is not forthcoming? The question was asked again today, what's your plan B today? if we are jointly responsible for overseeing that provision, we have to have a plan B. I've asked twice now by emailing the departments and those responsible for the cost. What would the cost be for this council to underwrite the 15 bus routes that are going to close? 8 of them will be withdrawn completely, 15 are affected, and of those, 10 will be withdrawn as of the 25th of April, so a month from today. What is the cost to this council if we choose to underwrite those 15 services for this financial year? Why are we not being presented with those figures? Why is that not being presented as a plan B? Where is our duty of care? Where is our measures, our contingency planning? If this were one of your vanity projects for a shiny new Capitol building down in Shrewsbury Town Centre, you would say to us, we've got to commit 20 million, and you would say to us, we must underwrite worst case scenario, and if any external funding comes in, it'll be a saving to the council. Where is the sense of duty to do the same to protect the people of this county? We need to start protecting people from these cuts. So I want to understand why you haven't done that so far. I want to know what the costs are, please. I don't have to keep asking the same question. And I want us to explore that this council, that we step up to the plate and take responsibility for these vital services. I have one last question, and I'd like a show of hands from the Cabinet, please. How many members?
You might not get one.
Well, it could be very telling if they don't put their hand up. How many members of this Cabinet actually travel by bus? Which buses do you catch? Did you catch the bus today?
No.
How many of your buses on the 15 routes affected?
One of them might be, yes.
Well, I hope you'll join me in underwriting them for our vulnerable citizens who need to travel to work.
Can I ask you a question? Are you talking about the specific 15 services by Arriva?
Yes.
Right, we have chosen to put money into some of those because those are the services that are being withdrawn by Arriva that we feel we need to retain. The other services, by Arriva's very own admission, are not utilised sufficiently, and they are seriously not utilised efficiently. You are asking us how much it's going to cost for us to do that. We'll get you that information. I haven't got a problem with that. What I've got a problem with is the constant rhetoric that we don't care, because we do care. We are finding it extremely difficult, as you are aware, we've made no secret of this, to make those finances eke as far as we possibly can. We are doing that with these bus services because nobody in this room wants to see those 15 bus services removed, which is what was going to happen.
But you're only saving 5, only 5 will be deferred, and I think you have to be very careful, actually, both in this item
and on the library item, not to use usage figures from a pandemic to then project those into the future, not least because people stopped using buses, and then when they were allowed to use them, as you'll be aware as a bus user, Leslie, that you had to socially distance, so they were 50% capacity. So we mustn't allow Arriva to use those figures to predict the future, saving 5 services for 2 months out of 15.
We asked that very question.
Good, thank you. Needs to be shared with all of us, doesn't it?
Chairman, can I just suggest we've actually got James Willocks on the call. He is our bus, he's our transport manager. He has got the answer. James, do you want
Hello.
to?
Come on, James.
Yeah, can you hear me all?
Yes, we can.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you, Cecilia. I think the question by Councillor Buckley earlier about is there a plan B, C? There's probably a plan B, C, D, to be entirely honest with you, but I think the information we had about really being serious about our bid to the government was not to come out with a plan B and C at this stage, because what we want is we want that funding from the government for the £98 million for the bus service improvement plan. But have we been working behind the scenes, talking with bus users and operators about what would happen if we didn't get all of that funding, or we only got a proportion of it, or we didn't get any at all? Yes, those conversations are taking place, and certainly that will be something that we'll bring to the portfolio holder, the leader, and the council in due course. But we're still very hopeful that we'll get substantial part of that funding, which, after all, was underpinned by that significant survey we undertook last year, which was absolutely brilliant feedback from residents. It blew me away, and I've been in the industry a while. 2,500 people. It took 15 minutes to undertake a survey, and that underpinned everything that we asked for. And that was not just covering bus users, because I think it's important to mention as well, is it's really important to protect bus users and those that use them at the moment, but it's equally important. And I think one of the members mentioned it earlier about modal shift, is to attract those people that don't use buses as well, and really try and make that an option of travel for them. The bus services that Arriva have recently submitted to say that they can no longer commercially sustain them, and the vast majority of those are commercial. It's worth just perhaps going back a little bit in time to understand that there are absolutely no regulatory powers the council has when it comes to bus services, especially commercial bus services. So the powers of what Arriva wish to do are down to themselves, of course. Now, what we've looked at is with Arriva those services that have got passengers and they've got no real alternative. So what we're trying to do is through the council and the portfolio holder is to look at subsidising those services that really they've got no other options. Ideally, nobody would want to see any of those services reduced at all, especially in a time when we're actually talking about a £98 million bid to government. But we think there are still lots of options there for us to enhance the Shropshire bus market. We're working on that behind the scenes with the operators. When it comes to the bus partnership itself, the operators are really keen to do different things. We've got Arriva, but we've also got lots of local independent bus operators that are as clean as mustard to do things, but they do need some funding and some support. And unfortunately, the information that's come out of the DFT recently has been quite slow to get to them, so they're unsure about what the position will be going forward. So they're taking into account the pandemic, but they're also taking into account what the Prime Minister said in his Bus Back Better statement, which is bus service usage has been declining for years anyway. The pandemic really probably brought forward what was going to happen in 5 years' time. Operators are now, like any business, trying to adjust to look at what they can actually afford to do. And then within that, we're looking at how we can reconfigure the bus network. It's a big task. There's an awful lot of bus routes. When we want to not just cover those bus routes that Arriva have reduced at the moment, but also think about those rural areas that have no bus services at all at the moment. So not everything is pinned on the bus service improvement plan, but a huge element is in summary. And we really didn't want to come out with a plan B and C at a time when we're saying to government and to the DFT, we need all of that 98 million, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, James. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Reisner and Councillor Dean and Councillor Buckley.
Thanks. I just wanted to say that I hope we do get the funding for buses, because it's absolutely vital that we have a proper bus network and we encourage people to use buses much more, given now that the pandemic seems to be coming to an end. But I would say there is a problem with some of the current services and the reliability of those services. I don't know about other members, but I've had a lot of complaints from members of the public who say that they've been waiting at bus stops for services which have never arrived. So I think that there is, as well as the plans going forward, we need to be looking at what's happening with the best bus network and make sure that those buses which are scheduled to run, which people rely on, actually appear.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Reisner. Councillor Dean.
Thank you very much. I think just going back to Councillor Buckley's point, really, I think the point here is about priority, and it's about putting money where our mouth is. You know, we've got you were presented with options at council at the budget meeting council to actually provide some funds. We came up with 2 budget amendments which would have allowed funds for active and public transport, both some revenue and some capital. And instead what we're seeing is, unfortunately, continued, investment, which is actually taking us away from active and public transport. We saw repairs done to the Heathgates roundabout recently, which took away the green boxes, which were for the cycle crossing, and they were replaced with absolutely nothing. So we are spending money, but we're not spending it on people who rely on public transport and who rely on active transport. So I really think that my question actually is whether this partnership gives us any more leverage with Arriva. And I am shocked with in particular the loss of the Route 20. That means that the service from Radbrook side of town into the centre of town is being lost. And that is one of our biggest growing areas of town. We are building enormous numbers of houses on that side of town, and those people will no longer have a bus service. The support that is being provided, which Shropshire Council is putting in to try and mitigate this, is entirely inadequate in terms of the need from the centre of Radbrook through to the centre of town. And I think we have to go back and have a look at that one and see if we can do more to support West Shrewsbury, because at the moment this is a devastating blow to those people who rely, who can't drive into town. And frankly, you know, we don't want people to be driving into town from the west of Shrewsbury. We do have to do something to support that bus service.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. Councillor Buckley.
Yeah, I think that there's two sort of parallel conversations going on here, isn't there? There's the excellent bid in for the Bus Back Better and the some of the improvements and new services that we hope to get from that. And then there's the parallel thing that's come from Arriva around some immediate announcements around closures of service, and they've got their explanation, which we'd like to look at when you give us that data. And I suppose my point is more on the latter. My point is, if we're entering a partnership, I want to see the council to put its money where its mouth is and to subsidise those gaps for longer. So yes, I appreciate we're going to save some of those routes for 4 weeks, and a few of them will be saved for 2 months, but that's not enough. And just looking down the list, I mean, of the ones that will be withdrawn, 3 of them are routes that take post-16 students to colleges. Of course, I'm going to mention Bridge North because I've been inundated by very angry and distressed people saying to me, how will their kids get to school? How will they access college? And how will people get to work? And that is the driver for my question. What more can the council do in this interim to underwrite these gaps where people cannot operate on a 4-week notice that they'll no longer be able to access their job? That's not good enough. I am very reassured. James will literally doing a great job. It's absolutely no criticism of any officers here. I'm delighted to hear that there does exist a mystery plan B, C and D. Councillors can be trusted with confidential information. We have to sign that we'll keep it confidential. So if there is a plan B and C and D and E and an F, please, if you don't want me to ask difficult questions, reassure me with this reams of alternative contingency planning. Because right now, residents in Bridge North are really upset and angry, being told their only access to Wolverhampton is being axed, and pinning our hopes on this Tory government, remembering where Shropshire is, doesn't really inspire many people. It hasn't worked so far.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. I think that's, again, more soapbox. James, did you just want to come back on some of the specifics about, I mean, I'm quite happy to go back and look at some of the decisions that we made earlier on, but I think they were made with a lot of thought having gone into them. So I'm not suggesting that for 1 minute there will be any changes, but I'm quite happy to go back and have another look. James, did you just want to comment on the Radbrook one in particular?
Yeah, certainly. That was I absolutely understand what members are saying. That's the probably along with the Market Drayton route, the biggest one that was the biggest change. So yes, we can absolutely revisit that. But it is a case of as well. I think that the one of the members mentioned earlier, forgive me, I forgot which one it was talking about reliability. So I think there is an element in here about Arriva as well, looking at it not just from a fare perspective as well, about from an operational perspective, saying which services can they actually do within the remit of resources they've got. So it might be a question of us also talking to, which we do all the time, other bus operators. And probably just to clarify my point earlier, Leader, was to say that when we talked about the plan B, C and maybe a D, that was around the bus service improvement plan. So obviously when we put that in, we put in a £98 million bid. At the same time, once we worked towards that £98 million, we built it up in different layers to get to where we wanted to get to. So if the government, for example, gave us £50 million, that would be a plan B for us of what actually improvements we could bring in. But we always said that if that happened, we would go back out to the public to say, we consulted on you to formulate a £98 million bid. We've now got 50 million, 40 million or 30 million. That's where the plan B, C, D comes in. We would go back to the people to say, this is what we've now got. What are your priorities for public transport based on the money that we've now got available to us?
Thank you very much, James. So I have a proposer, I have a seconder. All those in favour? Thank you very much, everybody. So moving on to the last item on the agenda, Chromeo Lane automated number plate recognition controlled bus gate. Councillor Ian Nellens.
Thank you. Councillor Ian Nellens, portfolio holder for climate change, natural assets and the green economy. This report aims to seek endorsement from Cabinet to implement a permanent point closure on Cromwell Lane following the expiry of the experimental traffic regulation order on the 18th of September this year. New regulations, members should be aware of the new regulations that have been introduced to allow local authorities outside of London to have the necessary legislative enforcement powers for moving traffic contraventions and to encourage behavioural shifts towards sustainable travel choices by keeping pedestrians and cycles facilities clear of vehicles for both cycling and walking. And it supports a commitment to the policy of further promote active travel choices. So you're all aware, a travel point closure was introduced on Cromwell Lane back in 18th of March 21, using funds granted from the Emergency Active Travel Fund. And the aim of the travel point closure was to create a safe corridor for walking and cycling to and from residential areas to access employment, including the Royal Shrewsbury Hospital, which is a major employer, as well as schools and key services in the area. This funding was received prior to the LCWIP, the Local Cycling Walk Infrastructure Programme, being commissioned. Just as a reminder of some of the aspects, the trial point was purely signage only, but there is evidence that the lack of physical barriers has resulted in a number of drivers ignoring the point closure and driving through it. So the report outlines the results of the public consultation exercise and the traffic surveys which took place in that area, as well as meeting with some of the residents in the adjoining streets. Funding is available through the Department of Transport Administered Active Travel Tranche 2 and Capability Fund to apply for both the supply and hardware and software and back office support for administration of the scheme. So just to summarise, the trial point closure for 18 months ran from the 18th of March on through until the 18th of September this year. The scheme closes a section of Cromwell Lane in both directions to all vehicles apart from buses. The physical location of the point closure allows for residents in the surrounding streets to access their properties from Cromwell Lane, but prevents through access for vehicles, allowing for a lightly traffic and therefore safer route for pedestrians and cycles. So the recommendations that the Shropshire Cabinet approves: 1, the proposal to implement a permanent point closure on Cromwell Lane following the expiry of the current restriction on the 18th of September 2022. 2, to seek to enforce moving traffic contraventions under the newly introduced civil enforcement through traffic contraventions Regulation 2022 when enforced and subject to the Secretary of State making an order. 3, to procure the supply of cameras, enforcement technology, hardware and software capabilities and back office support for administration of the proposed point closure, including review of contraventions and parking contraventions notices to a third party provider. 4, that any revenue collected from the proposed point closure in excess of the ongoing running costs is ring-fenced to fund future active travel activities. And 5, the monitoring and evaluation of vehicle contraventions as well as pedestrians and cycles on Cromwell Lane to inform future learning and application to the wider of future schemes, projects and initiatives across Shropshire. I move this report.
Thank you, Councillor Nellens. Do I have a seconder for that?
Happy to a second.
Thank you, Councillor Gittins. Councillor Dean.
Thank you. I welcome this, and I welcome the fact that we're going to be using ANPRs. As I understand it, this is a bit of a new initiative for us, and that we're also going to be using the new powers that have come forward. I'd just like to understand how we're going to manage that, because at one stage, as I understand it, the management of ANPRs was like to be outsourced, so I'd just like to have a little bit more understanding, because I think that the technology is going to be really important as we move forward to creating more pedestrianised and active travel friendly areas, and with the possibility of a further bid for Mini Hollands in Shrewsbury and perhaps elsewhere. This technology is really important for us. I'd just like to understand how we're going to be managing it. Thanks.
Well, item number 3 of the recommendation says that it's going to go out to a third party provider, Councillor Nellens, but
yeah, the funding will, first of all, there is funding to be applied for. It will include the back office support, all that goes with it. There is actually evidence from other local authority areas where this has made considerable money for councils. Obviously, it will start with a peak. As people become aware of the situation and start paying the fines, hopefully they will learn from it. But initially, there is indication and evidence that it will increase. The money will pay for itself.
Apologies for missing that in point 3, but in that case, it does seem to be worthwhile to pursue bringing this in-house at some stage.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Dean. I do know from other local authorities as well that they have brought some in-house, but it's gone back out of house again. I don't know what that says, but anyway, Councillor Basma.
Yes, thank you. I'm Councillor Basma Underdale. I welcome this very much. Because I think it's particularly in criminal alone, which I know, and the benefits there of the reducing that amount of traffic, it's fantastic. And but I would hope that this would be used in future in kind of a policy of this council to use APNR cameras, and particularly I would plead from my own particular ward where there is an area, a street where traffic is not allowed to go one direction. And in actual fact, what happens, a lot of traffic does, and the only solution to that problem is in Underdale Road. In actual fact, the only solution to that problem is an APNR camera. So I hope in discussions in future that that can be adopted there as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Basma. Having lived in Tankerville Street for some time, I know that only too well. I was looking to see if Councillor Rob Wilson was online, but he's not. As the local member, he's supportive of this, is he?
Yes, he's very, very supportive, absolutely.
Thank you, thank you. I just wanted to check, that's all. Okay, thank you. So I have a proposer, I have a seconder. All those in favour? Thank you. That brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you all very much for your attendance.